become a practice in our schools everywhere, not only in some schools of elites, but everywhere. And I like very much what Paul said, that the poorer the environment is, more opportunities you have to build on that, explain and use examples in a humble, creative way. So this is what we have to discuss. At the same time, we know about the impact and strength of frameworks. And at the moment we have, apart from this beautiful flower, we have the UNICE. We worked there on this issue for many years. We have another visualization. We have all what it was mentioned before. All these are variations of the same, because we all understand the same. And we need these frameworks to be complementary, if you wish, or the one explaining a little bit more some areas that are important for particular communities. We need to bring together the UNECE with UNESCO and the emerging EU work, not to open yet another question about identities. It is very important that we feel comfortable with what we have. And this is the way forward. So let's hear first, and then we discuss. Thank you. So,
start the presentation of
yeah.
Paul. Sorry, Bernard.
Bernard.
Good morning.
I'm sure, Bernard, you are, thank you, you are with us, Bernard.
Hi. Very happy to be with you and provide a few points to reflect on. So, well, you all know I'm Bernard. I'm with the Education for Sustainable Development section at UNESCO headquarters. And our current framework is the ESD for 2030 framework, taking us for the next, 8 years to try and achieve a lot of things. We are faced with multiple crises currently, whether they are environmental, health, political, or others. And we need to adjust our education systems and our educational and learning opportunities to those challenges. So through the ESD for 2030 framework, we see it, for us, it's one way to address that, because basically we need to rethink what happens in our schools. Whatever is learned in the classroom needs to be in phase with what's happening outside. We need our teachers to be able to be ready to tackle these challenges, because even if some of them might not be in the curriculum, they're part of daily life and they have to tackle those. And we need to also rethink, in a way, what is important. I think some of my UNICE colleagues will hear me again say maybe results in PISA might not be the more important thing. Getting certain grades after a number of compulsory years of education might not be the relevant thing. The relevant thing is that we need the skills, the attitudes, the knowledge, and the values to be able to address all these challenges. So how do we do that? How do we get to that? The whole school approach that you are discussing and you'll continue discussing for a little more is one approach, one way to deal with it. but it has different implications in terms of looking at the ESD for 2030 framework. As you know, there are 5 priority areas. One is policy. A whole school approach has to be integrated into the policies that are put in place. Second one is basically the learning environment. That's the whole school approach. But the whole school approach should go beyond just the walls of the school. I'll get back to that. The third priority area is capacity building. We have to get our teachers to be able to tackle those issues, which means they have to be able to be more flexible and not stuck within the parameters of set guidelines that they get. And they need to be able to learn to work with other teachers of other studies. ESD is not just for the science teacher, as we sometimes still hear from a few school principals. The fourth priority area is youth. How can we use the whole school approach to motivate, engage, empower young people to get their voice heard, so that they can do it? Of course, they are doing it in the streets, but that they can do it within the school environment, but also to, again, provide them with skills to be able to address those challenges. And the fifth area, priority area, is accelerating solutions at local level. Clearly, the whole school approach is one way to better connect schools and communities and neighborhoods, but we need to do more. We need to think, as I said, outside of the school walls. I think the whole school approach is a great way to push things, but we have to see it as something that engages learning communities, learning establishments with the outside community, with any learning opportunities. Those can be national parks, museums, volunteer activities. We also need to think of that whole school. Maybe we should change the S from school to society. It should be a whole society approach, because, for instance, climate, biodiversity loss, pollution concerns all of us, whether you're in a school or not. So we need to basically think out of the box. We need to think of better creating capacity for that, for getting communities to engage more. Communities also means the establishment, the public authorities, to address these issues. Because if we're going to make sure we make a change within the next 8 years, we can't just be, I would say, stuck in schools. We need to go beyond that. We have some elements already. Last year with Education International, we did a survey of nearly 60,000 teachers in more than 100 and some countries, and they all say, yes, we know climate is important. We know we have to teach it, but there are sometimes we don't feel fully confident in teaching that, because either our school administration is stuck in their views, or we don't have the opportunities to do things differently. So we have to change that. It clearly points to where some gaps are. We also carried out a survey of how environmental issues are included in curriculum and educational programs around the world, and the results is not that great. Less than half of those documents mention climate. So clearly we need to talk to education ministries and curriculum developers to say the environment is some elements of that need to be in the curriculum. Finally, in Glasgow, we managed to get ministers of education and ministers of environment to sit together and commit that those two ministries have to work together. Those two sectors have to work together for addressing climate. We need to do that the same in our neighborhoods, in our cities. We need to bring these different services together. As I said, it has to be a whole society approach. It cannot be limited to just the school. Finally, I would say we have lots of examples out there that we can pull out, bring in. We need to basically rely on the dynamism and the creativity of the teachers, the educators, the students to make that change. We have 8 years to go, but if we can move faster, it would be great. As you know, a new IPCC report is about to come out, and what has leaked already is that we might even reach the 1.5 target, or not so much the target, but the increase by 1.5 within the next few years, rather than in 10 years or so. So we need to act now. It's time to basically learn and act now, and not just, yes, we can talk about it, but we need to do something about it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Bernard. And in a few minutes, you managed to bring many things together. I noted down your different S from school to society. And well, why don't we meet somewhere in between with the institutions, not the school only, because it is perhaps for the next years something more feasible and more concrete in the mind of educators. So perhaps this is something to consider so that we have the same language, the same narrative. Now I would like to ask Arabella to take the floor, and then we continue our discussion.
Thank you. Good morning. This presentation can be considered as a continuation of the presentation that I did yesterday, trying to explain the role of whole school approach in the UNEC region. Today, with Professor Paul Pace, we will try to see and discuss with you what are the next steps regarding the integration of whole school approach in the UNEC region for the cycle of 2021 till 2030, which is a new UNEC strategy implementation framework. I suppose that I have a presentation. Oh, great. Thank you. Thank you. I will go. I prepared more slides than the time that I have, because I was trying to give to you as much information as I could. So I realized that my time is very limited, so I will go through to some slides very fast and stay in some that I think that are important. So the whole idea behind this new strategic framework on the UNEC region is to strengthen the position of ESD and on specific key strands in the UNEC region, in the member states of the UNEC region, from the early childhood, education till lifelong, to identify measures, realistic measures that can strengthen and commit people, governments, and all the interested parties to ESD, to support educational institutions in the direction of ESD, to assess the national and regional processes on ESD, to strengthen people to reconsider their lifestyles, and of course to empower the alliances and collaborations between the various regional and international organizations and mechanisms that are working in the field of ESD. The new UNEC ESD strategy framework takes into account, of course, the previous UNEC strategy per se that started in 2004, the previous framework of implementation in 2015 to 2019, the maintained given at high-level meeting in Batumi to continue the work on ESD, the various documents from the EU, and the EU and Global Agenda for ESD and SDGs, the UNESCO ESD framework, and the WHO initiative for integrating healthy, resilient environments. The timeline, this is just a chart to show you that this work for integrating this new policy framework was a very long-term process, and we're trying in a systemic way to establish this document that will be submitted for final approval to the UNEC steering committee is the official document that will be presented in the 9th ministerial meeting in Cyprus for adoption by the governments. If you see, it wasn't a linear approach. It was an approach that started in 2019 with groups of expert groups, with people from focal points from various countries. We had various meetings, and the first meeting were here in Netherlands in Hague. After we had COVID, so our meetings were online. And of course, the final document, as I told you, will be presented in Cyprus for adoption by the member states in order to start working on this till 2030. What is really important in this document is that is based on 4 key strands: the quality education, the whole institution approach, the ICT and ESD, entrepreneurship, employment, innovation. Youth is a key task force, and it permeates horizontally the 4 main strands. The 4 strands are developed in 4 axes: on the system level, on educators level, learners and institutions, and has a specific structure: introduction, vision, policy framework, strategic directions, recommendation, and work plan activities. And of course reflects the SDGs emergencies such as climate change and biodiversity. And of course, I forgot to mention that the coordinators of the UNEC policy framework were Roel and Michael Skoulos. This is a slide that I showed to you yesterday and is based on the assessment that we did in the UNEC region regarding the progress of implementation of ESD in the member states. This framework, the analysis based on the national reports that submitted by 34 countries. The analysis based on 58 indicators, and yesterday, if you remember, the whole school approach is based on the issue 2 promoting ESD in the formal and non-formal education, and includes 3 sub-indicators. Just very quickly to show you something that is interesting. In the analysis that we did from the national reports and how is whole school approach understood across educational levels, we can see that in various educational levels is understood in a different way. In pre-primary and secondary, is a whole school approach is considered something that can be integrated through ESD school plans, international education programs, collaborations, quality frameworks, performance reviews, professional development. In post-secondary and pre-university funding for competency development partnerships, in masters and PhD with performance agreements, faculty training, quality systems. I'm going to this. What kind of incentives are provided? We can see that, again, in various educational levels, incentives are varied. For example, in primary and secondary education, incentives include resources, training materials, guideline funding, certifications, networking opportunities, awards. Or in higher education and in the level of master or PhD, these incentives has to do with awards, networking opportunities, monitoring, funding, etc. Regarding the indicator, if the institution is developing their own ESD indicators, we can see that in a first level from 0 to 3, schools develop these indicators in an autonomous way, or in alignment with SDGs, or based on international indicators through self-assessment mechanisms. In post-secondary and pre-university education, we can see that these indicators are aligned with national priorities, like in Romania, action plan for improvement of ESD after consultation with government authorities, and in master and PhD, internal strategies to integrate ESD. What we tried to do yesterday, if you remember, I addressed that whole school approach in the UNEC region is not integrated as an issue that evaluate in a holistic and in a unified way, but is investigated through the whole objectives of ESD strategy implementation. So what we tried to do, we analyzed only the indicators that related with the ESD strategy implementation. And ESD strategy implementation is not based on whole school approach. Whole school approach is only one sub-indicator in the framework of these 48 indicators. So what we tried to do, we tried to see the flower that you developed and how the 6 objectives of the UNEC strategy and the indicators of the strategy aligned with the flower of whole school approach. And what we can see is that whole school approach is integrated in all the ESD framework. I mean, the evaluation indicators. And what is interesting is that where do we learn, which has to do with the facilities, operation, and infrastructure, is completely missing. This report will be published on May, so it will be available in the online on the website of the UNEC. But what is interesting is that we have some main findings. ESD implementation needs to be longitudinal. Whole school approach varies from country to country, and we have to respect the national priorities. Organizational structure of institutions impacted on how whole school approach is implemented. There is an absence of a universal system of indicators to assess the quality of whole institute approach implementation. I don't know if there is a needed at the end a unified, a universal system. There are differences among the way that organizations understand the whole school approach. And something that is interesting is that despite the progress that we did in formal education, gaps remaining, but there's still a challenge in non-formal education where whole institutional approach seems to be limited. The critical questions now where we base the development of whole school approach key strand based on if we can, and how a universal framework of indicators can be formed in order to practically address whole institutional approach to ESD, how can educational institutions can be supported to integrate whole school approach, how and what type of a system of indicators support countries to assess the quality of its implementation in sustainability, how can the systemic and long-term implementation of whole institutional approach in ESD be supported beyond school education, in which way schools, facilities and operations and infrastructure can essentially support the implementation of all of the aspects of whole institutional approach, and what policies, tools, and processes needed for this. What are the next steps for whole institutional approach in the UNEC region for 2021 till 2030? The first steps was done by Netherlands. With this report that Arjen presented yesterday, and the book that you will publish in Springer with case studies, sharing of experience and lessons learned amongst countries for whole institution approach. The second step that we want to move forward is create a self-assessment framework for whole institution approach by transmit from whole school, from whole school education to whole institution approach, means that we want to go beyond the formal system and include every institution and organization that can be that can become sustainable, enhance the capacity building activities for integrating whole school approach in the member states, and create an accreditation mechanism of the organizations that recognize the whole institution approach. The critical questions in this work that we did for the work plan activities is to support systems to be institutions to be open community of learning, facilitate partners to engage more actively to this process, to fill and meet the youth aspirations, to promote quality standards, to establish a culture of collaboration, to see digital learning as an integral part of this ESD work, and of course to see again, to reconsider critical issues which has to do with inclusion and equity. Okay, I will skip this. I'm going here, and we have. I think it's the last one. We were trying to see what, because this policy framework is divided in two periods. The first period covers the 22 period till 25 regarding the work plan activities, and the second one, the period of 26 to 2030. So the plan is regarding to the work plan activities to create and promotion a framework, a framework that will facilitate institutions to develop whole institution approach. And this framework will be based on areas of generic interest. Accompanying to this, to develop a quality framework for self-assessment in order to help organizations and institutions to identify what they achieved, where they still, what are their gaps, their difficulties, what obstacles they face and how they can overcome it, and to develop a toolbox with ideas and examples. This idea of toolbox is not to create a toolbox with case studies, but to create toolbox that will facilitate every stakeholder with easy and clever and creative activities to find itself in this process of whole institution approach first, and secondly, to see how it can be collaborate in a more vivid and interactive way. What is also we are thinking to plan, as I said yesterday, on October 5th to 7th of October, we have in Cyprus the biggest event in the UNEC region, with the organization of the ministerial conference, where ESD has a special place in this conference. So we're planning to see to organize a side event regarding whole institutional approach. There is the publication of the UNECE Strategy Progress Report, which will give us very interesting results regarding the whole school approach in depth in the UNECE region. We are planning to promote and give more visibility to the work that we are doing on this publication by participation in various forums, and of course publishing papers regarding the work we are doing in this field. Organizing study visits on whole institution approach in various countries, revision the indicators for whole school institution approach in the formal reporting, and ROEL is lead this process, and of course synergies and collaboration amongst the various organizations. This is the final slide. We try to see the needs of the countries by sending to the 56 member states an informal template regarding their needs, the capacity building mapping on whole institution approach. So we ask from the countries to identify us which type of capacity buildings they need in their specific national context, if they're in training, if they need training, good practices, specific research, or if they are planned to provide a specific expertise by funding, knowledge, expertise, hosting international events as Netherlands did. And the second is to identify the issues of whole institution approach that they consider as priority for them. For example, if they consider that is critical to support the leaders and principals on whole institution approach, engaging or how to engage interest stakeholders, school and community collaboration and monitoring. And thank you, Michael, for your patience and for all your patience, and sorry for exceeding the time again. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ravella. It was very, very detailed, showing also the rational, systematic approach followed by our UNEC group. I would like to give 1 minute to each one at the end. But I'm afraid we don't have time for questions. Okay.
And also repeat it in the microphone, also for the digital part.
Okay, and how we can deal with that, because later on through. Okay, so please put your question in the yellow papers, and we will take care also answering some of the questions put in the chat box.
Regarding, I think it's a good opportunity to ask from you to write in the second yellow paper about any other support or needs that you consider are important to integrate whole institution approach more effectively in your institution or in your organization. This will help us to frame better the work plan activities for the new period. Thank you.
So definitely the ministerial and the side event there in October, will help to continue a little bit this discussion. But I would like to go back to 3 things. First, the whole institution approach is a tool, but a special tool. It covers in many ways, horizontally and vertically, many of the issues of ESD in general. Second, we may ask countries to propose things, but this is at the end of the day an art of educators, is how they can translate and interpret what we are doing at the level of school or institution. Is not something that follows strict guidelines. So we need to create this framework in a narrative that penetrates the educational community and feel that they are helped by this narrative, by this framework in their everyday work. It is also important, having also Bernard with us and Arabella, to see, since I think both mention other partners, how we can deal with the European Union the first time they enter this with this peculiar environmental sustainability issue that might backfire the whole institute approach, because it cannot be only the environmental component there. So we need also to deal with that at higher level. And I would like to give the floor again to Paul, to Bernard and Arabella to say a few words commenting on what was said by the others. I'm sorry I cannot give the floor to all of you. It is very difficult to deal with this issue. So may I ask in a reverse order, Arabella, do you want to say something more, particularly on what Bernard and Paul said?
The only comment that I want to do, and I think that agree all of us in this room, is that we have to work together because we are sharing the same ideas, and we can see what alliances and what joint activities can be developed in order to facilitate countries and organizations better to integrate all these things that are joint tasks and the key priorities.
Thank you. Dear Bernard.
I think I would kind of jump on the comment you made about the EU. I think the UNICE region has several kind of political frameworks to work with. So we need to work together. We need to have a dialogue with the others, whether it's the EU or the Union of the Mediterranean, so that we come to an agreement on some of the terms that we use, because we're all trying to do the same thing in a way, but we might not be using the same terminology because we don't have quite this, either the same bosses or the same clients. So I would agree with Arabella that we need to, enhance the dialogue and increase the opportunities for exchanges between our different constituencies. And then just as another remark, I think we need to keep thinking about any possible opportunities to further this discussion on whole institution approach with even other sectors, other civil society groups that work on similar, but maybe not quite similar issues, but are facing similar difficulties or approaches.
Thank you, Bernard. You said that we are in front of many crises, and we started this document saying we should not lose the opportunity of crisis. And this is always the positive way of approaching the negative analysis. And Paul.
Well, basically, I think there is
are two Pauls. Yes.
Okay.
You first.
I think the challenge that we're currently facing is actually finding a balance between, I see them as two extremes. One of them creating sort of guidelines that is shared by the different actors. And I think the issue that Bernard has just pointed out is one of the crucial aspects. Agreeing on a common language so that when we're talking, we're speaking about the same thing and the same values. So that's one extreme. The other extreme is, as has clearly come out from the research that has been going on in this area, is that there are different solutions to the same problem. Because it all depends on the different contexts and realities of who is implementing them. And these differences are not just easily categorized in countries or localities, but actually they go as different as possible in different schools and different institutions. So I think there is this need to create this balance between finding a common goal, a common way of expressing the need to move further, because there is an urgency to move further, and also to accommodate the possibilities of different realities in order to get this thing actually going, rather than just discussing about it. Thank you.
Thank you. And is Paul there?
No, he's
No.
not.
Okay. So thank you very much. I think we had at least, yeah. Okay, we'll collect all these cards and we comment on that. But what is important is to keep in mind that we continue searching for appropriate indicators in the formal, non-formal, informal settings and the rest. But there is the urgency to start implementing that, even if there are still questions here and there. And we need to enhance now, first of all, to go further. Our horizon should include the non-formal and informal settings. Second, it is a matter of whole institution. That means we need frameworks, and we need at least school and institutional communities to feel comfortable with this idea. And finally, we need to have educators themselves understanding and trying and having confidence on themselves in order to go further. And on this particular point, I would like to thank the Dutch system also for this flower, because it makes it sometimes easier to educators to get through the questions. And I think with this, I would close this, and thank you very much indeed. And I apologize for not having the time to discuss as we hoped.